You've seen the title of this session, right? And I deliberately labeled it like that because, like she said just now, one of the biggest concerns that we have at the moment is how to tackle the world of brand safety and suitability, ad fraud, and making sure that all the brand communication that we put out there is actually being viewed by real human beings and giving us a chance to create an engagement, right? We spend huge amounts of money here. We will have a panel discussion after this where quite a lot of these things will come up. But one of the things which I would like to set up for that panel to have a discussion on is, yes, it takes a lot of time and effort, adoption of technology to ensure that the brands are appearing in a safe environment and that we are avoiding fraud. And we have to be prepared to pay for some of this as well, right? So let's just quickly go through what's happening and some of the key principles that we need to look at for all the people in this room, whether you're a brand owner or a publisher, an agency. I think some of these lessons are equally valid. A lot of you may have seen articles like this appearing in the press. Someone just put down a number out there as well. This article was really from someone talking about how this is a conspiracy and no one is doing anything about it. Now, things like this really annoy people in the industry, whether they are the brand owners, whether they are the industry bodies like MMA, the agencies, or the publishers, who are actually doing a lot of things over the years to fight the menace of safety and fraud. And the thing is that you may have some solution for what the fraudsters are doing out there today. But like I said, technology keeps evolving. So the solutions that need to be put into place also have to change to keep pace with, so that the fraudsters don't stay one step ahead of the brands in this game of cat and mouse. There's a lot of money being spent there. Crime is bound to happen. And it's our duty, our responsibility, our time, effort, and money. And it's our collective responsibility. So there's no point in moaning in articles like this that nothing's happening, because there is a hell of a lot happening and it will continue to happen. Some of the recent work which we've all seen, the MMA itself has done a survey and put out a report, most of you would have seen, including for Indonesia, on what's the extent of this and what are the perceptions of the brand owners on what's being done. The IAB has done a recent report. In Group M, there is a global brand safety guidelines book which captures best practices from across the world on what is the best approach or the most appropriate approach to tackle these issues so that you don't get into trouble or you don't waste your money and end up paying fraudsters. So let's quickly look at some of the basic concepts and best practices. In digital ad speak, when we talk about brand safety and ad fraud and viewability, it's really what this chart here is saying. Viewable, free of invalid traffic, in the required demographic and location, and in a contextually safe and suitable environment for the brand. In simple English, someone which needs to be seen by a human in the assigned demographic and in a safe and suitable environment. Now, there are lots of aspects to this, and there are many types of risks because of what's happening out there. So let's look at some of the common risks. Clearly, there's a financial risk, right? The ad is not viewed, or there's fraud traffic, or there's a reputational risk, right? The brand is appearing in an unsuitable environment and it's harming your brand equity. Or the user experience is terrible. Or there's even a legal risk. Increasingly in these days of regulation and consumer privacy, data privacy, we must not run foul of those, right? So there is a whole legal risk out there of open to being sued. There is publishers with pirated content, all kinds of things which are sitting out there. So financial, reputational, and legal risks which we need to cover. The hottest topics at the moment, therefore, to address. Social platforms, we've all seen what's going on there and the kind of content which sits there. So how do we navigate the amount of risk we can manage on those social platforms? They are huge reach platforms, so you can't do without them. But you have to be aware, because most of the content is user-generated, that there is a large element of risk. So how do we manage that? In programmatic, the biggest discussion topic is about brand safety, which carries both a financial risk, the ad not appearing or going to fraud, or going into the wrong places, the privacy compliance, which I talked about, and fraud, the invalid traffic. So these are the hottest topics. Many of you would have seen this in the past. This was 2017. The Times in London carried this massive story about how brands on YouTube and other platforms were appearing next to hate content or content generated by terrorist organizations. And it created a massive ripple around the world of marketing. I would say a lot has changed since that report came out, primarily because the social platforms have done a lot of changes at their end in order to trap this kind of content, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook or anywhere else. And today we estimate the level of these kind of impressions to be under 2%, which is because everyone in the industry has got together and created some solutions, put in some technology into place and tried to, but you have to be mindful of the fact that it is not zero. Accidents can happen, and there is always an element of risk which has to be managed and contained. Also, like I said in the beginning, technology is changing, and therefore the fraudsters are always coming up with new and innovative ways of trying to take your money. So if 2 years ago the discussion was on what technology to apply, make sure that we measure, we benchmark, we optimize, and we have a compliant process to manage that kind of brand safety. Today it's a lot more, because now many brands are spending fair amount of money within the total digital supply chain on applying technology, right? So how much of the money is going actually on media and on what they call as non-working media, and what's the value, what's the level of safety you get by applying all that? Is consumer privacy protected? Is the content that the brand is distributing appearing in contextually relevant places? There's always a trade-off between risk and performance. I can optimize purely on performance, and the cost will really go down for the brand, but it carries a very high element of risk. So when we judge how campaigns are working, what is the balance between the amount of risk the brand wants to take versus the money and the performance angle? And of course, social responsibility. The good news is that there is a lot of work happening at the industry level. You would have heard of the Global Alliance for Responsible Media. If you look at the chart up there, virtually every organization in the ecosystem, be it publishers, be it industry bodies, be it brands, be it the agencies, are all part of this body, all working to this one common agenda, right? And one of the good things that has come out, here's an example for what the kind of work which is being produced. For instance, safe content. So this body has come up with a bunch of what we call the dirty dozen, content against which no brand would ever want to appear, right? And then after that, I think this has to be the discussion with the brand as to what's your risk profile, how much risk are you willing to take? Do you want to go into only contextually relevant content and only place your ads there? Or are you open to take some risk with the content against which you're appearing? Yeah, so brand safety, we should look at it as a zero tolerance approach, but you have to be aware that there will still be accidents waiting to happen, and there's always an element of risk. The key thing is how to manage that risk and how to control that risk. So a simple framework with which we start always is, what's the risk profile that you're willing to accept? What will you do if your campaigns are going on publishers who are not necessarily got all the safeguards in place? Are you protecting yourself contractually? Have you established a clear operational process to manage this risk? What are the standards that you're putting in place? There are lots of industry standards. In Group M also we've got fairly rigorous standards. And a lot of education. I was horrified actually to see the results of the 2 studies which I had put up earlier. There's still a lot of, I would say, a lot of lack of awareness of what exists with which you can tackle brand safety and fraud. So there's still a lot of education required. I'm glad Rohit has put this on the agenda here for people to come on and discuss some of these things. In programmatic, again, there's a step-by-step approach with which the brands can protect themselves. We encourage them to trade directly with publishers, with trusted marketplaces, or with conglomerates of publishers, rather than just buy and open exchanges which are not compliant or do not have the technology to guarantee safe inventory. Mandatory use of third-party verification technology. Again, protecting yourselves contractually as brand managers, establishing clear processes, having the standards. The other issue coming up is on data privacy and compliance. Again, because there is so much regulation coming in this area, before choosing any third-party data vendors, making sure we interrogate and see what's sitting in that database. Is the tag management good? So therefore, is that data, third-party data, coming from verified, authentic sources? Is it compliant with the regulation? Is it clearly transparent to the consumers who've opted in to be in that database? That they know what use this data is being put for. And again, this is not set in stone. Because as you know, technology is evolving, right? With the spread of IoT devices and with 5G technology coming in, there will be data everywhere. The whole area of AI is based on the data which is being collected. There's a lot of regulation coming in place. So this is not a one-time fire the silver bullet and I've got the right answer. You have to be constantly on it and adapt yourself to the changing technology. On ad fraud, lots of figures being bandied out today on what the ad fraud is. They range from as low as $7 billion globally to as much as 42 billion, as Juniper said. Our own estimate is roughly about $23 billion. Now, this does not mean that marketers spend $23 billion on fraud inventory. It means that that's the fraud inventory which exists. If you safeguard yourself, you're not really spending money there, investing it, right? So this is the potential fraud which is possible. It's up to us to put in the best practices and make sure that we don't fall for it. So different kinds of ad fraud. We all know where it comes from. So some of it simply comes from the crawlers and the bots. Can be filtered. Again, so it's on how we manage our campaigns. There's more sophisticated fraud which comes from people who are basically trying to create that kind of false inventory, which requires a lot more effort, advanced analytics, a lot of human reviews and interventions. Most of the browser-related or desktop-related fraud comes from bots, but there is such massive boom in fraud on the mobile traffic now. Also, a lot of the fraud comes from China because of its own unique ecosystem where there are 3 big walled gardens and there aren't standards to trap or filter this kind of traffic. Shows you by device, desktop, connected TVs, OTT versus mobile app ops, where the fraud is coming from. And there's a whole variety of growing technology solutions which we keep working on in order to get one step ahead of this. So again, for all the brand owners in this room, I would leave behind 7 specific things which you must always be focused on. Working again, like I said earlier, for programmatic, directly with publishers, PMPs, and trusted marketplaces. There's a body called Trusted Advisory Group, Accountability Group in the US, which certifies publishers as free of fraud traffic. I would urge every publisher to make sure that they get themselves certified. We partner with the best in breed technology, some of the names you're familiar with on this, both pre-bid and post-bid. Insist on make goods for all the brand owners, because that's how you will change these practices and root out fraud. Remove all untrustworthy sources of inventory. Ensure that all the optimization that is done on the campaigns addresses, if all the clicks are coming from one particular IP. It could be an office, but it could also be fraud or the known proxies. Making sure, at least at Group M, we have a massive global list, white list, and black list on where we can and where we cannot appear. And above all this, because you can never be too vigilant, is to make sure that there's weekly human vetting of the campaigns, to review lots of other fraud cases, people masking the URLs, checking the domains from where the traffic is coming from. Is there an unusual traffic spike coming from somewhere? Is there a lot of referral traffic appearing? Are there domains which have very low attribution to the KPIs of that campaign? Needs constant review. Now this requires time, effort, money, right? It doesn't come for free. But mentally we have to adjust ourselves to the fact that if we want to stop wasting the $23 billion and we want to stop our brands from appearing in inappropriate environments, then we need to be prepared to spend the time, money, and the effort to address those kind of things. The last bit is on viewability. There is a global standard which the MRC had put out. At Group M, we've got more exacting standards on this on different platforms. If we put all the steps in place, all the best practices which I have talked about so far, it does change the game. So I'll just give you a simple example of what's happened to some of the big brands and marketers that we've been working with in this region specifically, and what's happened once they've started applying the best practices and all the technology that we've talked about so far. So 4 years ago, 2016-17, we started shifting these brands to the MRC standard, optimizing on that basis, on those viewability standards. Integrated the technology. The biggest in-app inventory supplier that we had in the region started reporting to us on viewability scores. And there was a lot of testing and refining on all the ad fraud and brand safety parameters. In the next 2 years, we've now evolved to a much stricter standard. So what happens is if viewability standards, which Group M follows, we optimize against that, so the money obviously starts flowing to the publishers where there's greater viewability. The next step has been that the trading has started moving in small doses in different markets to viewable CPM based. Fairly detailed guidelines for some of these brands on ad fraud, brand safety, what environments we are allowed to operate in and what we are not. And the top 2, in fact, in-app inventory suppliers in the region now report on viewability, and there's a significant change in performance. Look at the results. This is at a very macro level. On the left hand of the chart against the MRC standard, on the right hand side against a more tough Group M standard. You can see that whether it's display or whether it's video, viewability scores have consistently moved up in the last 3-4 years, just by doing all this due diligence and following this approach. And the whole incidence of fraud. On these marketers, on these brand campaigns, the level of fraud has fallen below 1%. In fact, Indonesian team has done an outstanding job. As you can see, the level of fraud on these brands for their clients is now down to 0.1% in terms of invalid traffic. So there's a dramatic difference once you start to put the best practices in place and take care of all of these. Now, like I said, it's a very changing environment. There's lots of new technology. Fraudsters always want to stay one step ahead to cheat you of your money. So you can never be too vigilant. There's a lot of regulation coming. But in absence of that kind of regulation and policing, what do? Do we sit back? I think for all the brand owners in this room, today you're reviewing every aspect of all your supply chains where sustainability, safety, consumer safety, all these are huge concerns. The digital supply chain is not any different in applying these same measures. Even if there's no regulation, that shouldn't stop us from, even for our own reasons, for basic moral reasons, do everything right. It's incumbent upon us to root out the problem, right? And we have to do it collectively. So on that note, thank you for listening to me. I hope this is a good introduction. And I look forward to the panel getting into some of these issues in more detail and putting up some hard-hitting questions on this one. Thank you.